Hey everyone, Future Paul here. If you clicked on this video, you're about to watch an interview with James A. Hunter, prolific author and also co-founder of Shadow Alley Press. And if you're interested at all about LitRPG indie publishing, definitely stick around and check out this interview. I just want to give a little caveat before we start. So this is actually the second interview that I filmed in a series of them. I did one with Michael R. Miller months and months ago, and I looked at this and I thought, I need this to be part of a series. And so I've been reaching out to authors sort of in the space looking to build out on that, and I'm very excited to announce that yes, this is part of a series. However, James A. Hunter has a book coming out like tomorrow, the second book in the Discount Dan series. I really enjoyed book one, did a review of it here on the channel, so I'm just sort of swapping around the orders to get this video out so that you guys can all go check out his work because he's awesome, and you should absolutely do so. So if we reference things from like another interview or things like it's slightly out of order, that's why. The next one, Michael's interview, is going to come out on the channel soon, so again, if you're into this kind of stuff, like and subscribe, all that good stuff. Okay, here we go. Let's check out this interview with James A. Hunter. All right, so we're back with another indie author interview. Joining me today is James A. Hunter, the writer of many series you've probably heard of, like Viridian Gate Archives, Vigil Bound, and Yancey Lazarus, going way back for that one. And now, most recently, a book that I did a review on the channel, Discount Dan's Backroom Bargains. Oh, there it is, and it's hardcover glory. Oh, very nice.
Yeah.
Welcome to the show, sir. How are you doing?
I'm awesome. I'm happy to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk a little bit about books. There's just about nothing more that I love to talk about than books and publishing. It's basically my entire life. So I love getting in here and getting into the nitty gritty with it. Just, I guess, a little bit about me. So I've been doing this for almost a decade now. For a decade, I published my very first indie book, which was Strange Magic, with the first book in the Yancey Lazarus series, which is urban fantasy. I published it January 5th, 2015. So I've been doing this for 10 years now, which is an exceptionally long time for indie authors who are kind of constantly churning out books. I think there are definitely other people in the space that have written a lot more than me, but I think I'm up to 44 or 45 novels at this point, and spanning 4 or 5 different series. Most of them are finished. I want to be one of those indie authors who finishes the things they start. There's, especially in the LitRPG space, there's a dearth of book 1s and 2s that kind of die on the vine and never have conclusions. So I've made it an effort to finish the things I start. I remember reading the Wheel of Time series by Robert Jordan, and then he died, and thinking, what a crushing blow it was to my soul that I was never going to have any sort of resolution on this story that I loved so much. And I was like,
thanks, Brandon.
No. I thought, if I ever become a writer, I will not do that to people. So that was a driving goal for me.
Number one goal: don't die. Okay, great.
Don't die. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, in life in general, but also in books. Apparently, just don't die.
I mean, right now, knock on wood, but right now I haven't died yet, so there's no proof that I'm not technically immortal. Well, that's kind of a wait and see sort of thing, but right now the evidence suggests that I am not gonna die. So we're gonna keep that. You're just gonna will that into the universe.
If I extrapolate that over 100 years, that's another 440 books, sir. So you got your work cut out for you. If you keep it up at this pace, no slowing down allowed. So we'll just keep that in mind.
No,
never. But no, this is great because I wanted to bring you on. Like I said, I had a chance to read Discount. You got your team sent it over. I loved it, man. I really, really enjoyed the book. I was like, this is one that I need to profile and highlight on the channel. There's, I think, a specific, I've talked about LitRPG a decent amount now. It's something I want to talk more about on the channel. And we've even talked about it before the camera started rolling here. This sort of particular itch that it scratches, you know what I mean? There's something that, progressive fantasy sort of is an umbrella, but specifically LitRPG, I think for folks like us who've probably been into gaming basically since they could walk or before. And it's one of these things that I just want to try and profile a little bit more. You talked a little bit about sort of your history with LitRPG in general. Honestly, just, I think, give us a little more of that. Sort of, where did it get started for you?
Yeah, so I'm sort of one of the first wave of American authors that sort of jumped on the LitRPG bandwagon very, very early on. So I was telling you before we started, originally I had been writing in urban fantasy. I had written 4 or 5 books in urban fantasy, and I was full time at that point, not making like crazy money, but enough that like I didn't have to have another day job. And I remember picking up a book on Amazon that was in my also bots or something, and it was a LitRPG book called Way of the Shaman, and I was like, that kind of looks good, video game stuff. So I remember clicking on it, reading it, and like tearing through it it like I stayed up until the early morning hours, and I remember finishing it and thinking, I don't understand this. I don't know what this is, but I need more of it. I need so much more of it. So the next day I went and I downloaded the rest of the books in the series. I blazed through those. I quickly sort of like pivoted, and I found another series by another Russian author called Play to Live by D. Russ. I read through that, and I was like, oh my God, this is so addictive. And it was hard to put my finger on why it was so addictive. I have theories now about kind of like why it scratches an itch that maybe other books don't. But I remember reading through that and then kind of like turning to the interwebs and being like, okay, where's the rest of it? And there were like 4 other series out at the time. There was like The Land was out,
Yeah.
Travis Bagwell's Awaken Online. There were a couple Delvers LLC from Blaze Corbin. And I remember reading through these and then thinking like, surely that there has to be
That
more.
can't
I
be
need
it.
more of this stuff. And there just wasn't any more content out there. And so even though I was like doing the urban fantasy thing, I was like, well, maybe I can just kind of do this on the side a little bit. So I started writing. Vertigan Gate Online was my first LitRPG series. And I remember just kind of like writing like a chapter every other day in between my urban fantasy stuff. I had stumbled on Royal Road. And so I started posting there to just kind of like get feedback in this community that I was pretty new. And people really responded positively. And so I ended up posting or releasing Vertigan Gate Online, the first book in the series, Cataclysm, in 2016, which again is kind of the very early days of LitRPG. And being exceptionally surprised when it took off and started outselling my urban fantasy stuff by leaps and bounds. And so I thought, well, okay, maybe there's something here. And so I just started writing more of those, and I kind of fell into it, and the response was so great. Urban fantasy at that point was and still is pretty oversaturated. It's a really tough market to make a living in because there's so many great authors, there's so many great stories, that it can be really hard to stand out. So in the LitRPG space, there's just so little content out at the time, and people were so hungry for it that I was able to kind of capture that first wave, and write it into a sort of a flourishing career. Was able to bring on some other authors. My wife and I opened a small press that we started bringing on some of my friends. I know we'll talk more about that. But yeah, it was really sort of life-changing for me. And I love LitRPG, and I think, part of the reason why readers enjoy it so much, like once you read it, it's hard to go back to reading other types of fiction. Have you had that experience at
Yeah.
all? Like,
Yeah, I mean, I'm like, you can look at the shelf. I've been, reading sci-fi and fantasy since I was a kid. I still remember my dad. We were in Powell's bookshop in Portland. It's the largest independent bookstore in the United States, and he sets Foundation down in my hand, and he goes, "You need to read this." And I go, "Oh," and
yes,
that's sort of, and he'd read The Hobbit to me as a kid. So like, I think for like a lot of us, that's where we started. And then,
yeah,
but
for sure.
LitRPG, and I have a whole video on my channel about why I think it's so addictive. So I'm curious to pick your brain on it too. So I come from the video. I come from the actual video game, like background space. I've worked in esports for almost a decade. And I think there are a couple of things, and maybe, you know what, maybe we just pivot into this now because I am so curious to pick your brain on it. So part of the things that when I was sort of trying to identify it, is there something in the video game space called a gameplay loop. The core loop is what it is. So basically it is like, if you take an RPG, take World of Warcraft, I'm sure at least some experience with World of Warcraft over the years.
Yes, I have many hours logged in WoW for sure.
Yeah, so you talk to an NPC, a little exclamation point over the head, you get a quest. Dialogue pops in, go to a place, do a thing. Okay, cool. You find out, maybe, if you're talking classic, no map, you just kind of got to figure it out. You go over, maybe there's some trials and tribulations along the way. You collect the things you need to collect. You kill the boss you need to kill. Ding, maybe you got to level up. You get some loot. You go back, you turn in the quest. You get more powerful. You can equip the new thing, and you go on to whatever the next quest in the chain. And that's a gameplay loop. And what they've, there's actual real psychology and science behind it about the dopamine hit that you get on that loop. And I think, to me, in my experience now, I'm kind of curious to get your thoughts on this. I feel like nothing else other than progression fantasy, and specifically LitRPG, has done as good a job as sort of crystallizing that loop in literary form. Yes. And I think you feel the dopamine hit for the character. They get that level up. They get that new whatever plus to stats. They, evolve their skill in a certain way. And then they go get to use it. And it's that moment where they tackle an enemy that they'd struggled with before and they dominate them now. Right. And you just go, yes, that's my guy, you know. And I think that's, to me at least, that's sort of the core of what makes it so addictive.
No, I think that that's probably number one on the list is those micro dopamine hits that you get throughout the book as you're reading through it, because it replicates that same feeling that you get from playing a video game and getting the cool achievement, getting the cool piece of loot,
Yep.
getting the skill and the customization. And I think that it's deeply appealing. That's why people like video games and like RPGs. And so having that in literary form, it makes sense that like you experience that sort of same emotional high. So I think that's a huge part of it. I also think there's a couple of other factors. So demographically, LitRPG tends to like our target audience is kind of like 28 to 50-year-olds, predominantly men. Are a lot of them listen to audiobooks. We sell more audiobooks as a genre than any other genre, which is also kind of surprising. About
Really?
50% of our revenue comes from audiobooks, which is sort of obscene and unheard of
That's
in
astounding.
the book space. Yeah, it's really strange. The next closest is sort of paramilitary sort of sci-fi. 25% of the revenue comes from audio. So audio is also a huge chunk of it. But I think a couple of other things that play to sort of why it's so satisfying is one, a lot of people that are sort of my age. So let's say like upper Gen Zers to millennials and maybe Gen Xers, right?
Yeah.
Are busy and they don't have time to sit and grind. You know,
Yeah.
when I was 25, or like I could spend a lot of time playing through Skyrim or Diablo or WoW and just like grinding out levels and doing all the fetch quests and all that stuff. But now I have like kids and soccer games and all kinds of other things that I have to do. So the amount of available time that I have to spend playing 100 hours of a game, it just
Forget
like
it.
it doesn't exist. There's not like time in my life for that, but I still miss that. And so with LitRPG, it's almost like getting the highlight reel of the best campaign that you've ever played without having to sit down and grind for 100 hours to get it right. So you still get that sort of visceral experience without having to do all the heavy lifting that you would if you were actually playing a video game. And so I think that that's a part of it too, is there's kind of these time constraints in our lives. And I think this is also part of the reason why the audiobooks do so well. A lot of the readers that I talk to tend to, you know, they're HVAC repair guys. They're driving trucks. Like the
I hear
number of
so much from
long
truck
haul
drivers.
truckers
I hear that's,
is crazy.
yep.
It's crazy the
Yep.
number of long haul truck drivers that are like, oh man, I've listened to all your books, because that's all they have to do, right? They're sitting
Yeah.
in their truck, they're driving in there, instead of like listening to the news, they pop on a book and they listen to it on audio. And so I think it's part of it's this time constraint. And then I think the other thing is a little bit of reader psychology. I think one of the reasons why LitRPG is appealing to me and I think other readers is because the core premise of LitRPG is that the world is essentially fair. In the real world, our world, I feel like as a
Sure.
millennial, I was promised you go to college, you do the things, you're going to get the job, you're going to get the house, you're going to get the life. And a lot of us are disillusioned where we feel like we did the work and we didn't get the reward. But in LitRPG, that's not true. In LitRPG, if you're
Oh,
smarter and you work harder than everyone else, the system is inherently fair. And so you get what you deserve. And I think a lot of our readers feel like they don't get that in their real life. They don't have the agency in their real lives, and they feel like they worked really hard and they didn't get what they were promised by society. But in LitRPG and progression fantasy, if you do the work, you get the reward. And so there's something deeply psychologically appealing about that idea to so many readers who might feel disillusioned by the world not giving them kind of what was promised to us as kids, right? So I think all of those factors kind of go together to make LitRPG this strangely appealing and weird genre that scratches this itch in a way that other books just don't.
wow. That is blowing my mind a little bit, because I think you're 100% right. It's so interesting too, because there are no lazy protagonists in RPG.
No. Yeah,
It doesn't exist.
people they're competent and they work hard, and usually they get like a broken skill, but because they're competent and they work hard and they
Yeah.
work the system, they achieve anyways, right? And I think that that's something that resonates with a lot of readers, because they feel like I'm hardworking, I'm competent, I'm good at my job, but Joe gets the promotion because he's good at talking to management and I don't.
Yeah.
But not in LitRPG, man. Not in progression fantasy. In progression fantasy and LitRPG, you do the work, you reap the benefit, and that is so appealing for readers. That kind of combined with the dopamine hits and the time constraints, I feel like is kind of this holy trinity cocktail of like, oh my god, I need more of this, right? So that's a big part of what I think it is.
For sure. I mean, or at least how to make a successful lit RPG, and that's
For sure.
which is interesting because I touched on this in the review for Discount Dan, and I definitely want to talk to you more specifically about the book itself. But one of the things I mentioned in this, how I thought it was really, I think you did such a fantastic job. Because someone for me who is starting to write in the lit RPG space, and for me, honestly, like reading this is as much research as anything, because I'm really curious, what are the best authors doing? And I think what really jumped out at me is there's sort of a checklist that I'm now looking at, sort of, especially at the start of a book. Like if you're scrolling through, you know, I'm in the middle of a process right now of like looking at all the top series that were on Royal Road the last month and sort of picking out some of my favorites, making a video about it. And it was so interesting to me to look at what some people were doing and some weren't, because one of the things that jumped out at me is there's sort of like a little checklist that I sort of was like going down the list of like, here's what you do. Part of it is setting the power ceiling. And you do this instantly. You show what the max potential power of the character could be right off the rip. And in this case, you know, seeing the Flayed Monarch going toe to toe and doing all that, I thought was like sick. Part of it too is establishing sort of what the, you know, stakes are, both short term and long term. Sort of, I need to survive in this case, or I need to survive right now. And again, this isn't too spoilers for the book. We'll keep this spoiler free. But then eventually, like, hey, I need to be able to survive long enough to get set up and, you know, sort of situated, and not eventually get found out and killed by a cult. Great. And sort of, you know, putting that through as well. And then again, the other element is sort of what is going to be the sort of skill path is part of it as well. And having what is your unique, bent on the system as well, I think is one thing. But sort of how is the character going to approach in a different way? And I think you did literally in the first chapter, you did all of those things immediately, which I thought was like, to me, again, I'm like, if I was writing a checklist of like what the beginning 50 pages of a lit RPG should do, you crushed it. Was that something that you're consciously thinking about when you like, do you have a checklist as well as something that you're thinking about, or was it just kind of, that's how you wanted to write the book?
No, I definitely approach it kind of with an eye toward sort of where the market's at and what the market wants. And the funny thing is that the market has changed a lot. So like, for example, if you go back to sort of 2015, 2016, a lot of the lit RPG, my first lit RPG was a VR based system.
VR mode,
And I think the reason why is because so few people understood what lit RPG was. It was really hard to wrap your head around it. But having the characters literally be set in sort of this video game setting kind of was like a zero entry pool, where it was really easy for readers who had no idea what the genre was or to just like wade right in and be like, oh, I get this. I understand this. It's not a choose your own adventure, which is the thing that people always think it is, but it's not. But now, as lit RPG has grown and it's sort of permeated the readership, a lot of authors won't even give a reason for a system to exist. It just does. You're in a secondary fantasy world, and magic is governed by video game logic. That's all I'm going to tell you about it. You'll never know more, and we're into the story, right? And I don't think that would have worked 7 years ago or 8 years ago because people didn't understand it enough. But it works now, where people are like, yeah, I don't need any explanation for why the system exists. It's lit RPG. That's all I need to know. Give me the goods.
Yeah.
And so things have changed a lot. So I'm always kind of constantly reading in the space, talking to other authors in the space, seeing where the market's headed, and then trying to write something that I think is going to be fun for me, but also appealing to the readership as a whole. A lot of those tricks are things that I have picked up from other authors that worked really well. Setting the power, the sort of the power limit. I picked that up from Will White. Cradle is one of my favorite progression fantasy series of all time. I've listened to it and read it multiple times, and Will's just a great guy on his own. But I remember reading through Cradle, and Lyndon starts out so weak and terrible, and he doesn't get really very strong. Like by the end of the book one, like you're still kind of thinking like, man, a strong gust of wind could kill this guy. Like he is not a good, super strong OP protagonist. But Will did something so smart in the first 25% of that book, where Serial comes down, and then we get to see sort of this vision of the future of him fighting the Dread Gods. And it was like, oh, that's where we're going. And now I'm willing to go along for the ride, even though it might be a little bit slow and it might be a little bit weak, because I know that Lyndon is going to get strong enough to punch a god in the face. And I want to see Lyndon punch a god in the face. And so that was something that stood out to me like so powerfully as such a great device. I was like, that's something I want to incorporate in more of my storytelling, because it's such a powerful hook. And there's a lot of little things like that
Yeah.
that I picked up from various authors and friends, where I see sort of a trick that they do, and I'm like, I get it. I get why you did this thing, and then that goes into the bucket. It goes onto the checklist. And I'm like, all right, this is something that I want to establish early on, so that I'm setting up the premise so that readers know exactly what they're going to get, and then I'm going to do my damnedest to make sure that I deliver on that promise. Right. So that's kind of a big focus, especially in those early chapters, is setting up the premise and then delivering on the promise of the premise, if you will.
100%. I mean, Brandon Sanderson talks a lot about the idea of a tone promise. I think it's a similar idea. I think it's a plot promise and a tone promise. You know what I mean? You want to set up those things early. And again, I thought that was really, really well done. I think on both fronts, because this is a very funny book. Like I was laughing aloud. And again, obviously that's sort of what's in right now. Very snarky systems are very in. Talk to me about the thought process, sort of getting your head into the space of sort of the system and that kind of other stuff as well for you specifically. And also maybe just give us a pitch for Discount Dan, because we're kind of a little bit out of order here, but maybe give us a bit of a pitch for it too. Yeah.
No, where the conversation goes, that's the best way. So again, I've written a lot of different series. Tonally, they're very different. I've written other series that kind of lean more into the humor. This one's definitely more dark humor. I have another series called Wasteland Warlords. It's kind of a 6-book complete thing. That's like a toned down version of Discount Dan. It's less snarky. It's more post-apocalyptic. I did a really absurdist series called Shadowcroft Academy for Dungeons. This guy gets isekai and reincarnated as a monster, and the monsters have to go to Shadowcroft Academy to learn how to kill heroes. And so they have all kinds of sort of bizarre, wacky Harry Potter classes on murder and setting up dungeons and doing all kinds of weird things.
Is that
and that
play
one's
on Monsters Inc.?
Sort of. So it's got kind of that same feel, but it's Monsters Inc. meets Harry Potter, but for dungeons, right? So it's very absurd. So and the tonally, it's always a little bit different. I think definitely the single largest influence for Discount Dan was definitely Dungeon Crawler Carl. I love Matt. I love DCC. I've read those books multiple times as well. And I think with Discount Dan, just like in my early days of discovering LitRPG, reading through stuff and then wanting more of that stuff. When I got done reading through Dungeon Crawler Carl, and when I started the series, I think book 4 had just come out. And I remember reading through the first 4 books, and I was very well versed at this point in LitRPG. And DCC scratched a different part of my brain than all other LitRPG. And I was like, oh no, I want more of this, and I know there's nothing else like this on the market, because I know the market super well. And so I remember just feeling defeated, because this thing that was so good didn't exist in any other format, in any other way, by any other author, in the same way as the early days of LitRPG, where I found these great books and there were 4 series, and I was like, well, no, this can't be right. And so I really ruminated on it, because I love the writing. I've always sort of leaned more toward horror, especially in my urban fantasy stuff. And that was something that never really played well in the early days of LitRPG. We had published some stuff that was more kind of like LitRPG horror adjacent, and it absolutely flopped, bombed. People were, they just wanted fantasy. That was it. And so seeing how DCC sort of pushed the boundaries of the market and what sort of the reader tolerances were, I realized okay, now the market's in a place where it would accept books that kind of have some of those elements. And so I kind of ruminated on it for a long time. I knew going into it that I didn't want to do the game show like Matt did. In my opinion, no one is ever going to be able to do a LitRPG Hunger Games-esque, battle royale without just having a worse version of DCC. DCC is kind of the gold standard at this point in LitRPG, but I wanted more stuff in that same sort of the vibe and the tone of kind of the dark horror comedy with sort of this weird existential dread sort of pushing in on the edges a little bit. And so eventually I had been a fan of the Backrooms community for a long time. And if you're not familiar with the Backrooms, for the people watching, it's kind of this weird internet meme that started in 2015 or 2016. It was just it was a meme on 4chan that kind of, I think so. And it sort of spread out from there. It was, be careful where you walk. You might find yourself in this no clipping into this place, the backrooms, right? And it was kind of this weird, ugly yellow wallpaper. And I kind of love that idea. And I remember thinking like, man, the backrooms sounds like the coolest dungeon on the planet. And that was kind of the birth of this idea of this reality sitting next to our own, where people accidentally stumble into, and then just having it be this endless labyrinth of dungeon crawling. And I thought, man, that there's a lit RPG premise there, and because it already kind of has sort of those horror connotations, I thought marrying these two ideas was the way to go. And so that's kind of how I ended up eventually with Discount Dan. Kind of the pitch for people wondering. So the basic premise: our main character Dan, after a night of drunken debauchery with his buddies, he accidentally finds that he is no clipped into the backrooms, this extra dimensional reality adjacent to our own. It's basically 1,000 levels of monsters and horror cobbled together from abandoned shopping malls and amusement parks and video game arcades. And it's filled with these entities called dwellers, who are crazy, eldritch, twisted monstrosities. Dan and his best buddy Croc, who is also sort of this eldritch monstrosity, who, because of his love of the Twilight book series, has decided murdering humans is unethical, have to grind their way through 1,000 levels while being pursued by this creature called the Flayed Monarch of the 999th floor, who is hunting Dan because Dan has accidentally managed to steal something very valuable from him, and he wants it back. So that's kind of the basic setup and pitch. To get a little bit more into it, it's got some slice of life elements on top of the dungeon crawl. Is so the thing that he steals from the Flayed Monarch is powerful, but not in the way that Dan wants, right? Dan wants the ability to be able to, blast lasers through walls and, but it's not that. It's like this pure utility skill. And so he has to figure out, how do I take something that is powerful, but not in the right way, and turn it into something that I can use to survive the wrath of a demigod who is hunting me. And so it kind of, it evolves into this weird sort of slice of life thing where he's using the skill to build allies in sort of tenuous, weird ways, instead of sort of direct combat, which is probably what Dan would prefer to do. So that's kind of the setup and the pitch for it.
Yeah. And I think, the way you build out the set of characters around it, and I think honestly the slice of life elements too were part of what I actually enjoyed a lot about it. Because I think, and again, we could talk about this all day probably, but the idea that those real moments of intensity, especially when you add in the horror elements, only hit as hard as the downtime. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Because if you don't have a point to reset, let the reader take a break. If everything is intense, nothing is. And
that's right. Yeah, you're not wrong.
Yeah, and I think that was what was really fun about it, is that I felt like I was just as invested in the moments of like, slight spoilers, how do we set up the shop? How do we do, you know what I mean? Like I was just as invested in those moments as like the, oh crap, we need to grind, hit X level to be able to go do this next thing. And again, really touching on that sort of classic RPG, movement through it, that dopamine hits. So no, I thought it was, again, I really enjoyed it. So actually, I get sent a decent amount of books, I would say, and that was one where I looked at the cover and went, okay, here we go. This is a character. This is a dog with googly eyes. I didn't know at the time, made of croc material, just looking at the cover. And then I literally read it on one flight. I was flying to Hawaii for work, and tough, I know. I read it on the plane.
I will cry for you. I will weep.
I know, it was terrible. No, and I read the whole thing in one sitting, which was not uncommon for me, but definitely like a bit rare. And I went, sweet, let's go. And I think for me, one of the things that really jumped out again was sort of the way that you were able to weave the humor and the horror elements together, which was very cool. And again, obviously for you, that's maybe a little bit easier when you're writing it on your own. Because one thing I noticed when, sort of doing some prep for this and all this kind of stuff, and we can talk more about this as we get into sort of the publishing side, you've co-written a lot of stuff, which I think is super interesting and actually becoming, I think, a lot more common in the lit RPG space, especially I think places like Royal Road that really reward folks that deliver a ton of chapters all the time, 5 days a week. You got to be doing it. So we're seeing a lot more of these co-writing situations. I'd love to sort of pick your brain about that a little bit more. How do you find people to co-write with? What does that process look like for you? Is one person focused more on one POV? Does one person do like more scripting and storyboarding, and one person does more edit? Like, tell me about the process. I'd really love to hear it.
Yeah, no, for sure. So there's a lot of different processes, and it really depends on the co-authors that I've worked with. So initially, so some of the series that I've co-written, I co-wrote one called War God's Mantle, another one, Wasteland Warlords, and which is part of the Rogue Dungeon universe, which I co-wrote with my good bud Eden Hudson. So initially, a lot of those co-writing projects were actually designed to bootstrap those authors. So I had sort of gotten this kind of early critical momentum, and this kind of ties into the publishing part a little bit. So I got kind of this early critical momentum, and when I started the publishing company, the goal was never really to end up where we were now. It was just my wife and I. My wife had come onto the business. I had been running the self-publishing side of things for about 2 years, doing it on my own, and making like okay money enough to live off of. Right. In the beginning of the third year, she was like, "Hey, this is doing well enough. Like maybe this could be like a real thing, right?" So she decided to come on full time as well, and she took over the business side of things. So I was no longer running our ads and our email campaigns and all of that stuff. She was doing the marketing. She's much more analytical than I am. Her background is in pharmaceuticals. She was a chemist, and so like she likes numbers, she likes data, she likes looking at spreadsheets. That makes her happy.
Actually,
not
a
so
very
much
common
me.
crossover I found, surprisingly.
Yeah. And so I kind of ran her through my process, and she was like, "Oh, sweet summer child, there are so many ways to optimize this." And within a couple of months, she was doing phenomenally better than I had ever done on the marketing side of things and on the business side of things. And it also freed me up to write more. And so sort of over the course of that third year, things really, really started to take off. And we had sort of discovered that we were accidental publishing experts, right? Like it was a comedy of errors that led to this. Like it was not our intention, but it was like, oh man, we're like kind of super good at this. I had a bunch of friends who were really good authors, really talented. I'd been working with them. We would like swap chapters, do like alpha reading for each other. They were really good writers, and they were really bad business people. And so I was like, well, we've become like accidental publishing experts. Like maybe we can help you do this. And so that was kind of how we started the publishing company. It was really just like to help our buds, right? That was it. It was just kind of, we kind of have the skill set and you're awesome and we like working with you. So let's do that. And one of the other things that I realized early on was getting visibility that first time is exceptionally difficult.
Yeah.
A lot of the series that they had released on their own, even though they were exceptionally well written, they just didn't get traction in the marketplace. But I kind of had this blooming brand and this big readership. And so the goal with those early co-author project was, okay, let's write something together. People are going to read it because they're my fan base and they like the stuff that I write. But now also we're going to be able to peel off some of those readers for your next project that you launch that's going to be solo. And so that was kind of a marketing strategy for our early round of authors that sort of built Shadow Alley. Was we would do a co-author project to bring in authors and get them familiar with this new author that they had not been familiar with, and then have them write their own standalone series and bootstrap it off the success of the co-author project so that one would get sort of critical lift and critical momentum. And kind of through that process, we were able to, the three people that I had co-written with were all able to go full time on their next series based on that kind of process. And so it ended up kind of being this match made in heaven where, I'm helping them, they're helping me. And then also we're kind of turning that into this branded career on this other side, and we're publishing those books as well. So that was kind of why I started doing the co-author thing. In terms of like how it works, it really depends on the individual co-author. So sometimes, like, so with Aaron, who I co-wrote Shadowcroft with, and then also War God's Mantle, we would switch back POVs a lot. Anytime there's multiple POVs, kind of the easiest way was you each take a POV and then you run with that POV, because then you're going to have the uniqueness of a voice. Like it's really going to sound like just a different person wrote each of these things, because a different person wrote each of these things.
James S.A. Corey
when there's kind of one main POV, there are kind of different ways that we would divide up. Usually I would do, not usually. So for all of my co-authored books, I would always do the world building. And so I would do like a big world building doc, and then I would do a really expansive outline. It's really hard, I have found, to co-author, like to do pantsit in co-author. Like it's crazy to me that there are people that can do that. That just seems insane. I don't know how it works. So I would do the world building doc, I'd workshop it with my co-author, and then I would write usually like a 25,000 word, basically rough draft outline.
Draft zero. Yeah.
That was like the entire bones of the story from beginning to end. So it wasn't, it was all of the book, but like in its bare bones form, right? So I would skip over a lot of like the setting description. I'd have snippets of dialogue, fight scene goes here in brackets. So, kind of all of the stuff that you add in, but all of the story beats, plots, character, basic dialogues, emotional upbeats and downbeats, all of that would be in the outline. And then me and my co-author would basically do developmental edits on the outline instead of on the book. So we would go through and we poke holes in it. And we do all the dev editing on the outline. So that way the story was exactly what we wanted it to be. And there wasn't any like kind of loose fat on it. And that saved us a lot of time and pain once the book was finally done, because we didn't have to go back and, rewrite 20,000 words because we introduced a character in chapter 4 that we forgot about. And then we had to edit them out. Right. So that was that's how we kind of laid the groundwork.
That's so interesting. I've talked to a few authors now. I've never heard of anyone taking that approach at all, but I think that's really, because you're right, because you start off with exactly what you want and nothing more. And then at that point, I assume they go through and they break it out more scene by scene. And then you go, I assume you have sort of, especially now at this point with Shadow Alley, probably more set editors that you work with, set artists for covers and stuff like that. What was it like building up that sort of support crew around that as well?
That was and I think it sounds really easy. Like, oh yeah, just find an editor, find an artist. It's not. it's really hard. And we spent many years kind of working through bad editors and bad artists and wasting a lot of money on, because this is one of the things that no one really talks about in the industry. You don't have to have credentials to be an editor. Like literally any person can be like, I'm an editor. And like that's it. Like all you have to do is
EFA website. Look, I'm an editor now. Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah,
it's there's no credentialing. Like you just hang up your shingle and you're like, and now I'm an editor. Like, and there's not really a good way to vet it. We have learned some tricks of the trade since then. Yes.
Ooh, go spill the beans.
Okay, so one of the things I would recommend doing, for all of the authors that are out there, if you can find a really good editor that is really good, but maybe they're super packed, like their schedule is booked. One of the things that I would recommend is pay for an edit on like 25 pages, just 25. And then what you do is you keep that as your sample edit. And so anytime we're bringing on a new editor, what we'll do, we have our editor that we trust, who's already edited this 25 pages. So we'll send them this new editor, the unedited 25 pages, and we'll say, hey, can you do a sample edit for us? And most editors will do a free sample edit to kind of test the waters and make sure they're doing a good job. And then all we do is we'll do a word compare doc, and we'll see, did this new editor catch 90% of the mistakes that the trusted editor did? And if so, probably that editor is going to work out and they're going to be okay. And so that was a thing that took us, it seems so simple in hindsight, but it took us years to figure out a vetting process for new editors. And now that's kind of our sample is we have we have the core, and then we can compare it to it. And now all of a sudden we have this litmus test by which to compare whether an editor is going to do a good job on future products. So that's one thing that we learned. Now we have about 6 copy editors that we work with, that work with us kind of exclusively. And then we have 3 proofreaders that do kind of the proof after the fact. Yeah. Usually when an author comes in, they get assigned to a specific copy editor, and that copy editor is going to work with them through the entire course of all of their books, but certainly at least that specific series, so that they can kind of keep continuity. And that has been a process. We've also had to experiment with weird ways to edit. So early days of Shadow Alley, we had an author who still writes with us. His name's Aaron Crash, and he is easily one of the most prolific authors. The man has a skill set. He has a single ability to write words fast. He's like Ricky Bobby, driving the Talladega Nights, man. I mean, that's the one. I want to go fast, and he does. He writes 6,000 to 7,000 words a day, every single day. 6, sometimes 7 days a week, and he has done that for 4 years. When we brought him on, he wrote a book a month for us every single month for 14 months. And these are not like short books. These are like 90 to 120,000 word books. And he was doing one a month. He was writing so fast that we actually like kind of engineered a new editing process for him, where we would have, he would he would upload the book a quarter at a time, and we'd have the copy editors working behind him as he was writing, so that the turnaround time from him finishing a book to us having a copy edited proofread book that was ready to go to market was about 5 days. So we were able to arrange it in such a way that there was basically zero downtime from when he was turning in a book to when we were publishing a book, and still having it go through 2 to 3 rounds of edits as well, which was kind of a weird, crazy, Wild West thing for sure.
I tried doing some quick mental math on that. That's like it's like 1.5 million words. So that's not an insignificant amount by any stretch.
No.
That is, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I mean, but that's what I guess in this case, one of the perks of being a small press is you don't have to worry about the red tape, something like a Big Five, which of course that would never be feasible. I mean, the idea of turning around a book from completed to on a shelf is at minimum 2 years generally in the traditional publishing space. And that's something that's so interesting. So I did a video not too long ago, Level Unknown by David Dalglish. I think I said his name right this time. Jesus. Which is one of which was, to my knowledge, the first traditionally published lit RPG book that was not originally a serial. You feel the need to caveat that with DCC. And it was really interesting because I think it's done okay, but it's so interesting to me that this is Orbit, so a subset of Hachette, so still like a big, them and Tor, sort of the big two for sci-fi fantasy. It's really interesting to me now to see TradPub finally starting to wake up a little bit. How does that feel for you? I mean, obviously it's like, oh, more competition, but also like, that's gotta be validating for you who's been doing this for so long to go like, finally you're catching on here, team.
It's interesting. So I have sold a fair number of books. I think across all my books, I'm somewhere north of 2 million copies sold across all my books, which is not like that's a lot of books sold.
That puts you in the top 1% of traditionally published. Yeah, it's up there.
Yeah, I mean it's a lot of books, and I've had the tradition. I finally have an agent, but for years I didn't. And so my tradition was every time I started a new series, because I like to have book 2 done before I release book 1. So that way I can make sure I'm kind of optimizing the time to market on books 1, 2, and 3. And because I'm writing book 2 and book 1 sitting there, I made it a habit of querying agents with book 1. And I would say like, hey, this is me. I've sold a lot of books. This is a new one. It's LitRPG. Would you be interested in repping this and trying to take it traditionally? Because I still think that there is a place in the market for traditionally published books. I think the one thing that they do better than us and will always do better than us is books on bookshelves in bookstores.
Yes.
It's the nut that indie authors cannot crack despite our trying. We have spent tens of thousands of dollars to try to figure out how can we do this. And the reality is it's almost impossible. Not impossible, but almost impossible because the margins are so thin because of the return policies of bookstores. If you have one bad print run, it can just absolutely sink you.
Yeah.
And they're large enough and they have enough authors, enough risk diversified that they can make it work, even though their margins are maybe only 3%. We don't have the kind of money they do, and we don't have the bandwidth they do to be able to take those kind of risks. So that's the one thing that they can do really, really well that no indie so far has been able to accomplish. So I still think that traditional publishing is valid and good and has a place in the market. But with all that being said, they really essentially do not understand LitRPG. I would every single time I'd have a new series. Hey, you want to just like gamble, take a shot on it? And they're like, no, not at all. Nobody wants this anywhere on earth. We don't want it. We can't sell it to anyone.
Audible gets it. How do we back engineer, reverse engineer this from Audible? They posted about an interview they did with Matt about the impact of LitRPG in this space. How do we reverse engineer the traditional publishing industry to get this? Because
this is the crazy thing, right? So the audio companies have leaned into where the traditional publishers have pulled back from. And it's not just Audible. Podium, Tantor, all of these people are really active in the space. And this honestly is the reason why traditional publishing, I think, is going to struggle getting LitRPG titles. There are authors, traditional published authors, that like are kind of familiar. Their agent comes, they're like, hey, LitRPG is really hot. You should read these books, and then do that, right? So they try it. but the problem is that they're a lot of them are not really immersed enough in the space. A lot of them are really good writers, but the thing that I have found over and over and over again as a publisher is that the stories that do best are not necessarily from the best writers. It's usually from the best storytellers who are elbow deep in the genre. They are true fans of the genre that have read everything that else that's out there, and then they just like me, they get to the end of the road, they've read everything, and they say, "Man, I don't have anything new to read, and it would be really there's a hole in the market, and wouldn't it be cool if this thing and this thing had a baby?
Yep.
Oh, that would be cool. I'm gonna write that thing." And it turns out that there's a bunch of other readers just like them who are like, "Yeah, that is cool," and so they put it up on Royal Road.
Yep.
And it gets a big following because Royal Road is approachable. Most of these people that are having success are do not believe that they're going to be full-time authors. That's not, they're not doing this with the intention of querying agents and going.
No.
They're just writing a story that they're passionate about, and Royal Road is a really easy conduit to find readers and get immediate feedback.
Oh,
and
every day. The loop is incredible.
Right, every day.
Yeah. And it's write
day.
the book that you want to read. And I think that's
Write
obviously that's such a silly statement, because yeah, but like especially in LitRPG, because I feel like, and the term we'd use in the gaming space is endemic. You need to be endemic. Okay. You need to be someone who is again elbows deep in the genre, who knows the ins and outs, who knows the lingo, knows the language. You know what I mean? And I think that's honestly one thing I've actually been so impressed with, is that there's, with maybe one exception, basically no proprietary language ever around things. You know, people use dungeon crawling, people use, you know, I mean, isekai obviously has a broader terminology, but like there's so many, of course, now that I need to think of any, I can't, but there's a lot of like basic terms across the system stuff that are so ubiquitous, but everybody's just okay that they're all used. And we're all fine with it because we get it, because it allows you.
It's like baked in as a trope now.
Exactly.
At this point.
Exactly. And it was so interesting because I'm a big Warhammer fan, and I was getting into trying to read some of the Black Library. So I don't know if you've ever read anything in the Black Library, but a little bit. What was so interesting about it to me was that this idea that you need such a level of knowledge going in to get the best experience out of reading these books. There's no hand-holding to be had at all. Yeah. And I do think that's one element, that's one thing that LitRPG is going to have to overcome a little bit as it becomes more and more mainstream. Because it is. Because I think once the DCC TV show drops, I think, candidly, I think it should have been animated, but here we are. It is what it is.
You and me both.
It is what it is. I don't know how they're going to do, for context, again, I live in Hollywood, basically. I know how much this stuff costs. Holy crap. I don't know how much money Seth MacFarlane's going to spend on this, but it's going to be like, you need like $10 million an episode minimum to make the show.
$10 million an episode. That's what it is. Yeah.
Oh, well, they're okay. I didn't hear. There you go. So yeah, it's going to be okay. At least I've got it. So I think that's one thing that I think we're potentially going to have to overcome. I say we, the LitRPG genre is going to have to overcome a lot, is this sort of initial barrier to entry. And that sort of leads me to sort of my last main sort of question here, which is, again, there are a lot of folks who've probably never written anything. Again, to your point, we talked about the male audience, 28 to 50, basically. Folks who candidly probably haven't read a lot, at least going. I mean, traditionally we look at the demographics, men and women reading, and a lot of these people probably, a lot of these guys probably haven't read a ton. I'm kind of curious if you have sort of any initial, like, especially looking at Royal Road, obviously there's whole guides you can do, and there's all this different kind of stuff. But for you, at least, like, what are some basic things that if you are a new author coming in, you're like, I'm going to write LitRPG, do you have any kind of like, check at least these 3 boxes first? I don't know if it's as simple to break it down, but as best you can.
No, absolutely. So number one, again, the people who do well in this space are not the people who are coming in, who are writers coming in looking to make a quick buck. They are people who find the thing, love the thing, and then want more of the thing. So honestly, the single best piece of advice I can give is go read 50 books in the genre. Go just read 50 books.
Yep.
I would also recommend, candidly, going back and reading some of the earlier LitRPG books. And the reason why is, again, because those earlier LitRPG books did a lot more hand-holding, because they had to handhold because audiences didn't know what this was. They needed an explanation for, well, why is the magic game mechanics? I don't understand, right? And so a lot of those earlier books really, really worked to try to have a compelling reason for a system to exist in the world. And we've moved away from that because readers don't care and they're so immersed in the tropes now. They're like, yeah. It's a system. I get it. But for new readers that come into that, it can kind of like you do kind of feel like you get thrown into the deep end. And you're like, what's going on? Why? So I would say go back, read some of those earlier LitRPG books that did really well. Viridian Gate Online, obviously this one. The Land was very, very popular. And even though I think that there are better books on the marketplace, I think is like a early primer for LitRPG. It's great. For progression fantasy, I always recommend Cradle. Dakota Kraut's Divine Dungeon series, if you like dungeon core stuff. Rogue Dungeons, another good one. These are a lot of the sort of the early forerunners that again kind of introduce the concepts in a more manageable, easily digestible way. And then kind of once you have the grounding, you can move on to some of the more popular stuff. This is actually one of the things. DCC is also a great starting point because this is one of the things I think DCC does exceptionally well versus other sort of more modern lit RPGs is Matt comes up with a really good reason for why this system exists in the first place. So it is absolutely lit RPG, but done in such a way that it's really easily consumable by people who are not familiar with the genre. And I think that that's part of the reason why it's had the broad success that it's had. So DCC, obviously, some of the other ones that I would absolutely recommend, if on the lit RPG side specifically, He Who Fights with Monsters is extremely popular for very good reason. That one's always a must. I really like pretty much everything that Seth Ring writes. So if you're not familiar with Seth Ring, just go check out basically any of his books. He's phenomenal. I love him to pieces. I think also kind of getting steeped in progression fantasy side of stuff is good too, because there's so much overlap, even though they're different. Cradle is the gold standard for progression fantasy. There's none better in my mind than that series. And if you like audiobooks, Travis Baldree does such a phenomenal job narrating them. You can't go wrong. Unintended Cultivator, that's one of the books that we publish by Eric Doctigny, is absolutely fantastic. If there was a series after Cradle, I'd slot in Unintended Cultivator. But that's a big part of it, is really just kind of getting your teeth in there and just like chewing through 50 books until you really wrap your head around like, what is this? Why does it work? What are the things that are appealing? And specifically if you're a writer, and this is going to sound kind of cold and mechanical, but I think this is true in every genre, but especially true in lit RPG. Take a notebook as you're reading through the books and just bullet point the tropes, because here's the thing that you're going to notice. You're going to notice, just like you were saying, there's a lot of things that overlap from book to book to book. And so you're going to see, oh, this is System Apocalypse, which is different than, VR Trapped in a Game, which is different than Dungeon Core, which is different than
Portal,
Second World Isekai.
Yeah.
And so you're going to start to see all of these sort of similarity overlaps between all of the things, what they all have in common. Super competent MCs, kind of
weak to strong. I mean, you think about it in terms of Royal Road tags.
That's right.
And it's maybe this is again the cold and mechanical business marketing people looking at it that way. Feels a little gross, but also like, if this is what you want to do, if you want to take it seriously, that's how you have to look at it. Like this is a genre, especially. I mean, you look at honestly, and this is so funny. My girlfriend doesn't make fun, but she gets a giggle out of it. When I first started getting into RPG, she basically said like she sort of looked at it in a little bit. And she's like, "This is like cheap romance novels, but for men, like dollar store romance novels." And I went, "Oh no, you're right. Oh crap," because it is. Because the guy's going to get the girl's going to get the guy. You have to have. There are romance more than anything actually has the hardest genre definitions that you can have. You have to have a happily ever after, or happily for now, whatever it is. And it was so interesting to sort of make those comparisons. But once you realize that there are people following a formula, but then it's just like, what is your take on that formula? And that's what I think. And that's what blows it up. Exactly.
Yeah, no, dude, you 100% get it. And here's the thing. A lot of people, I don't write romance. I don't particularly read romance. But a lot of people knock romance. And they say, oh, it's easy, it's cheap, it's formulaic. But here's the thing. There is an artistry. You're right. It is formulaic. They have, they know there's going to be a sweet kiss on page 25. They know it's, there's going to be this, an enemies to lovers thing on page 75. It's they know exactly what the reader knows exactly what they're getting into. So for an author to know, I have to tell the same story that's been told 1,000 times before, but do it in a way that's interesting and unique enough that someone who has read that same story 1,000 times before reads my version of it and says, wow, this is new and unique and interesting and fresh enough that I couldn't put it down. There is an extreme level of artistry there that is extraordinarily hard to be able to accomplish. And so the people who say like, oh, isn't it cheap writing, having a formula? No, it takes a special set of skills to be able to say, I'm going to make something that's 50% product, hitting the genre, hitting the tropes, hitting the beats, hitting the pacing, hitting the character arcs, and also 50% art, where it's new and it's unique and it's fresh and it's the same, but it's different enough from everything else that they've read that they say, wow, this is just like these 10 other things that I love to pieces, but also it feels so fresh that I couldn't stop. That being able to walk that balance is its own type of artistry.
That is a skill. 100%.
Yeah, for sure.
100% a skill. I agree. And again, people aren't going to like it, but there are a lot of parallels that you can run between the genres, because at the end of the day, they are both just dopamine hits. But what's so interesting too, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, the idea that it's less at this point, at least in the genre, it's less about being the best writer and more about being the best storyteller. Because I agree 100%. I do think that's though. I do think that is something that we're sort of, if I'm, again, putting my business hat on, looking at industry trends, I think we are getting to the point now where some of the scrappier or looser dialogue and, grammar and a lot of that kind of basic stuff is now starting to fall away a little bit. And I do believe, that my prediction, at least, anyway, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this, is that sort of LitRPG light is going to be sort of the next wave. And we're sort of, and again, I don't actually think DCC is this, but I think it evokes elements of this, because it's still at least the first books are pretty crunchy in that regard.
Yeah, pretty crunchy.
But this idea that, we don't have audiobook narrators, sorry, Travis Baldry, reading pages and pages of stat blocks, and that we are creating something that is a little bit more approachable in that regard, and maybe just, a little bit more polished, I guess is the term I'll use. I'm kind of curious to get your thoughts on that, because in my opinion, I think that's sort of where this is going. It's sort of it's a real genre, but the outside validity of it being not just this, dorky genre that only lives on Royal Road. This is something that is real and legitimate that you see on bookstore shelves.
Right. So a couple of thoughts on that. I do think the quality has risen dramatically over the past 5 years. It leaps and bounds better than a lot of the early stuff that came out. And I think that the increase in competition has required stories to get better. It's required covers to get better. It's required editing to get better. In 2015, the first LitRPG books literally could have been unedited manuscripts with hand-drawn covers on notebook paper, and they would have sold because people were just so hungry for the content. But now there's enough content that it's got to be really good storytelling and also passable enough writing that it doesn't get in the way of the story. So definitely there's an increase in quality, and I think the rise of publishers like ours, like Aethon, like Mountaindale, like Portal, is also kind of pushing up the quality level, because we have all of these resources available to us. And so we have teams of editors that an individual indie author might not have access to, and we have money to make sure that the book gets polished and gets, developmental editing and get all of these things to kind of push it up to the next level. I still wonder about how traditional publishing is going to adapt to this space. My gut says not particularly well. At least with new titles. I think they're going to do okay with adapting books like DCC that sort of get enough critical momentum in the indie space, and then sort of buying up the rights and doing print runs on their own.
Sure.
I think bringing in new authors, they're going to have a challenge. And part of the reason is because, one, they're clunky and slow. LitRPG authors have grown accustomed to, I'm going to get an advance, and my book is going to be out next month. I think they're going to have a harder time sort of biting the bullet and saying, oh, so you're going to give me $4,000, you're going to get all rights, you're going to get the book for the life of copyright, And also it's not going to be out for 2 years. Oh, I'm not ever going to do that. I'm going to go with literally anyone else who's going to give me more money. The contract's going to be for 7 years and it's going to be out in 3 weeks from now, right? It's really hard to compete with the speed to market and the flexibility that we have and the deals that we have. Our contracts are leaps and bounds better than what traditional publishing can do. Yes, we're not getting your books on bookshelves in bookstores,
Sure.
but we're giving 50% royalties. We're giving advances. We're like,
Okay.
our contracts are only for 7 years instead of the life of copyright, which means until you die and then 70 years.
Yeah.
So
And then it's public
all
domain,
of that is
so
much
you
more
don't
appealing.
Yeah. And that's so interesting too, because I mean, for context, like most traditional publishing stuff is 15%, 15, not 50, for folks who are who are like, wait, that's a big deal. Like my facial reaction was there for a reason. And I also think what's interesting, we haven't touched on this at all yet. I'm really curious, and we're you know what, we're gonna keep talking. I don't care how long this video is gonna be, as long as you don't have anywhere pressing to be.
No. You can edit out all the dumb parts of me saying dumb stuff.
I don't think I'll need to edit this really at all. Patreon. That's one last thing I kind of want to talk about here as well. Because that is obviously such a huge. I mean, we have writers making $40,000 a month.
Yes.
30,000, yes. And like more than a few. Some of the biggest single monthly Patreons, period, involve this. Involve LitRPG writing. And I'm really curious 100%. To get your thought. Is that something that you've done? Is it something you've explored? Something that your writers do? How does that work with sort of your publishing structure? I'm really curious. Like, if I was a writer who's doing this and had a Patreon, would I need to give up part of that? Do I keep doing it? Can I still keep posting it week to week? I really just want to dive in and hear what you guys do.
Yeah. No, it's a great question. So I'm a huge advocate of authors, especially in this space, using Patreon, because a big part of it is community building. And that's one of the other great things about Royal Road and Patreon. And why I think our readers are so voracious is because they feel like they have ownership of the product. Yes. I post to Royal Road. I'm posting Discount Dan, book free right now to Royal Road.
I'll put a thing
People
on the screen.
come in and they make comments. And then I listen to the comments, and sometimes their comments are their suggestions are better than the thing I was going to do. And I'm like, damn, that's a great idea. I'm going to do that. And all of a sudden they feel like, hey, this book is the way it is because of my contribution. Yes. Right. So all of them feel like, since you're kind of from Hollywood, they all feel like mini executive producers. And so all of a sudden they feel like they have this ownership of the product. And so when it comes out, they want to support it because they feel like they helped build it, and they did help build it. And so they become evangelists that go out and word of mouth spread about your product, about your book. And that's a huge part of the contributing factor to the success of books. So I think Royal Road is great, and I think Patreon is great in terms of building community. The other thing is, and you're right, there are a lot of authors that make a lot of money on Patreon. Royal Road also feeds directly into that.
Yep.
Royal Road integrates really well with Patreon.
Yes.
There's even a button on the bottom of every chapter. Yep. You know, go and support them on Patreon. So my general suggestion is, at minimum, you're going to want to be 10 chapters ahead on Patreon is really what it is. The most successful authors are the ones who are 40 or 50 chapters, basically an entire book ahead on Patreon, because then it feels like the most value add. You're spending $5, but you're getting content that wouldn't be out on Royal Road for a year and isn't going to be out on Amazon for 3 years.
Yep.
Right. So because some of these authors are so far ahead. And so that really feels like this huge value add to those readers. In terms of things that do well, and this is one of the things I've struggled with. I have a Patreon and it does okay, but not like some of these other ones. Patreon, the people that have the most success on Patreon are people who are basically writing forever series.
Yes.
And this is just kind of one of the cold, hard truths of publishing. All of us like to think that readers are here for me, James Hunter, for you. But the reality is, 50 to 75% of readers are genre locked, which means they will not follow you outside of a specific genre that you're writing in. So if you're writing a LitRPG and then you write an epic fantasy, even if you feel like there's a lot of overlap, only 25% of those readers at most are going to follow you over. They are genre locked. 50% of those readers are series locked, meaning they're not there for you. They're not there for your other things. They are there for the one thing that you're giving them that they want. And the second you stop giving them that thing, poof, they are gone to the wind. And it doesn't matter that you just started this other new thing that's really cool and kind of similar to thing A.
Or maybe even better. Maybe you think it's even better.
Right. Even better. They don't care.
Yep.
It's not the thing that they want from you, and so most of them won't even try it. And so really, so for me, it has never worked out as well because I tend to like I'll write 3 books and then I'll write the first book in a new series and then so I jump around a little bit more. And so the second I stop working on a project, all of the people on my Patreon that are there for that project, they go and they vanish.
Yep.
And then I'll get new patrons for the new thing that I'm working on.
Yeah.
But then once that runs its course, they're gone again. So Patreon tends to work best for the authors that have a really big tentpole series that they never stop working on and basically never intend to stop working on. Dungeon Crawler Carl, He Who Fights with Monsters, Primal Hunter by Zogarth, Unintended Cultivator, Wandering
Defiance
In,
of the Fall. Yep.
Defiance of the Fall. All of these things are basically forever series.
Yep.
And so those are the things that are going to do best on Patreon. In terms of how it works with us, we don't take any money.
No.
We don't ask for any money. In fact, we actively support. We'll put Patreon links in the front and back matter of all of the ebooks that we publish, and we'll say, hey, if you want to support this author, go here, do it on their Patreon. We provide free ARC books for them to distribute to all of their patrons.
That's cool.
Prior to the launch, and our thought process behind it is these are true fans. And so, yeah, maybe we're giving out 200 or 300 books to true fans, and we're not making any money off of that as the publisher. But those true fans are, again, they're gonna go forth and they're gonna advocate for this thing, and they're gonna say, man, I had a great experience. I interacted with the author. I got a free copy from the publisher. Everyone should go check this out. And so for us, that's a win-win. We want to build up our authors' Patreon and help build that brand, because the better community they build, the better they do there, the better our books are going to do when they launch it to Amazon and Audible, right?
Yeah, when that eventually gets stubbed and it gets taken out. Yeah, exactly, that whole point. And it's so interesting too, like with the ARC process. It's so this is something I've done a lot of research into, just again the marketing brain. And like a traditional ARC, you'd be lucky to get 20% of total ARCs sent out reviewed. I would be so curious to know what your guys' number as a ratio is compared to that. I bet it's at least twice as high.
Oh yeah, it's significant. We really work to cultivate. Like we have our own internal street team. We call them the archivists.
Nice.
We have a Discord.
Nice.
They come in. They get review copies. So it's a whole thing. We've sort of gamified the archivist section of our Discord. So they get like kind of kudo points, and they get like special badges. They basically advance through a progression system as they review and rate books and things like that. So it's a really engaged community, and the fact that the authors are in there talking to them regularly also kind of increases that conversion rate in terms of reviews. We have some very prolific ARC reader reviewers who have read literally hundreds of books for us that we publish. They read almost every book that we put out, and we put out 3 to 4 books a month, and they're reading all of them.
Yeah.
And the other crazy thing is, and this is something that I have noticed on Royal Road, a lot of the people on Royal Road leave very thoughtful reviews, like well thought out critique, world building, character, here's my score for the grammar and style, like really well thoughtful reviews. And so one of the things we always encourage our authors to do when they're stubbing the book on Royal Road and releasing it to Amazon is to literally message the people that have left reviews and say, hey, thank you so much for leaving a review. Would you please consider going and leaving that same review over on Amazon for the book? Here's the review. Here's the link.
Idea.
Just go copy it over to Amazon. I'd really appreciate it. It means the world to me. And I cannot tell you how much those reviews help. And it's true.
And they do.
Like, especially for a new book, like having that social proof early on can be the make or break difference between whether a book is going to get critical momentum and whether it's not. So there's lots of ways to engage with the community that benefits them. They're getting a cool thing. They're getting a voice. They're talking to each other, but also helps sort of give you that lift that you need to get into the atmosphere with a book.
Yeah, which is fantastic. And again, that's so many great little nuggets of information here. So thank you for sort of giving that out as well. And no, I mean, again, I think that's, I have a funny feeling we could talk about this all day, but I'm looking at the length of this recording going, I got to be a little bit cognizant here. But no,
for sure. I apologize for running my mouth so much here.
No, please do not, because every single piece of information here has been super, super valuable. And again, I think, in terms of, I feel like I don't think there's a single person I'm sure there are, but I don't feel like there's a single person really who sat down and read a LitRPG who hasn't, at least secretly, maybe in the deepest depths of their hearts, thought about writing one. I feel like this
Yeah.
is more than anything that I've seen, and on the Discords, on the subreddits, folks. This is driving so many people to try writing for the first time, which is so cool.
It's so approachable. It really is.
It is.
Yeah.
And I think it's because so many of the stories, and for me, the way I judge prose is I'm a very much like movie in my head kind of reader. If the prose doesn't ever trip up the movie in my head, you've won. You don't have to have these sprawling, Rothfuss or Martin-esque, whatever, huge, languid pages of in-depth descriptions. You know what I mean? Is if I can still see the scene in my head and I never have to blink figuratively, then it's won. It's succeeded. You know what I mean? And I feel like a lot of us are in that space now.
Yeah.
So I think it's definitely like, how do I write the best thing I humanly can, but also how can I write something that's approachable? And I mean, obviously biggest author in the world, but like Brandon Sanderson, I think does this really well. How do you write something that's approachable? Do we think he's ever going to write a LitRPG? Do we think? No, I don't know. That would be that.
I mean, I've heard grumbles that whispers that maybe he would at some point. He's familiar enough with the genre. I've met him a couple of times, and so I mean, I know he's like it's on his radar, but I'm not sure. It would be such a departure, and he's already got again genre locked readers, right? I mean, it's Brandon Sanderson, so who knows? I mean, they might the legions might turn out just because it's Brandon Sanderson. He's one of those rare authors that maybe transcends that, and people will follow him over. But I don't know. But to your point, and this is another. Sorry, I don't want to give too much advice. It's fire hosing.
Just go.
One of the very hard things that I have had to learn through a decade of publishing is that the books that writers like to read and the books that readers like to read are not always the same thing. Sometimes they are, but oftentimes there's not. They're not. We've published some books that I think. Path of the Thunderbird by Eden Hudson. It's a cultivation novel. It's one of my favorite things that we've ever published, and it did okay, but it didn't do great.
Yeah.
And I think part of the reason is because it's a book with gorgeous prose and language. It drips atmosphere. It's so good. Every writer who reads it is like, God, this is amazing. I wish I could write this good, but it didn't do that good in the marketplace. And this is not a knock on Eden. It's a fantastic series. I wish I wish
let's shout it out.
I wish they turned it into a movie, right?
Yeah.
But again, it kind of goes back and it reminds me, and it's something I have to remind myself that the things that writers like to read are not the things that readers like to read. And so when you can kind of approach it with that mindset of, why did this book do so good? I'm reading it and I'm thinking, this isn't that well written. Well, maybe you're not the target audience for it, right? Because a lot of us, especially if we read a lot of books, we critique and edit a lot of books, we get in the space where we're actively looking at the prose. The majority of readers don't. It's just like you're saying, that it's just, is it good enough to not get in its own way and mess up the story? And that's it. That's kind of the only bar that they're looking at is, does the writing not draw attention to itself? And as long as it doesn't draw attention to itself in a negative way, I'm going to read it and it's going to be great as long as the story's good. And that's it.
Yes. 100%. Yes. I could not agree more. And I think that's something that get out of your own way, I think maybe is the summation of that advice, especially for new authors coming into this. But no, that's fantastic. And I'm going to write down, I wrote down the timestamp of you saying that because I feel like that's the intro to this whole video. And again, we talk in the music space as well. We talk about writing music for musicians versus writing music for listeners. And I feel like it's the exact same thing. But
it's exactly the same thing.
Yeah, like you could love your, 9/16 time prog metal, jazz fusion, whatever, you know what I mean? But that doesn't mean that everybody's going to like that, as it were. There's a reason that pop is popular, as it were.
That's
so,
right.
So it's not necessarily saying write for the lowest common denominator, but write something that's approachable and accessible for people. And I feel like that's what
100%.
And I feel like that's what this genre is, because this is really focused in on LitRPG that I love, and I feel like that's succeeded. So again, love the insight that you've given. This is fantastic. Again, I guess for folks who might be looking to find, is there like a reading order for your stuff that you recommend? Is it start with Verde Engage? Is it should they just grab Discount Dan? Like, how do you feel like people should engage with your books?
I got a lot of books. Verde Engage online is probably my most popular 8-book complete series, all on Audible, Spotify. You can find it everywhere. It's great. It's super fun and a really good, zero entry pool if you're new to LitRPG. Rogue Dungeon is a dungeon core. It's wildly fun. Got a great cast of characters. Also, complete 6-book series, all on Audible. Nick Bedell narrates it. That dude could read a phone book. I would listen to it. So if
Yeah,
you like audio, check that one out.
Yep.
And then probably my other one, my newest one that I love to pieces, Discount Dan. If you're a fan of kind of the more dark horror comedy DCC vibes, this is a great place to start for that. Book 2 is done. It'll be out July 1st. On ebook and audio. Book 3 is in the works and will be out later this year as well. So all 3 of those will be out this year. So lots of really good stuff. Kind of read through the covers. You go to my Amazon author page or shadowalleypress.com and you can find my books. If there's something that kind of jumps out at you, start there. That's what I say.
And last one here, and I don't normally do this, but I guess you're uniquely set up for it. If there's an author out there who's watched this video, they're here, they stayed all the way to the end and they go, wait, I have a story that, man, I would love James A. Hunter to read this. Check this out. Is it a contact page on your website? You know, say hey, maybe Shadow Alley is the right way. How would you like authors to reach out to you?
No, for sure. So we do not have an open submission tab on our website.
Okay.
Because when we did, we'd get flooded with so much stuff, our readers literally couldn't handle it all. And so, and I never wanted to get in the place where it was like you were waiting, 9 months on a reply or something like that. So, but what I will say is, I personally and my acquisition editor Cameron are really active on Royal Road. We have Shadow Alley Press on Royal Road. You can find us there. So my best suggestion is use Royal Road as a springboard to test your ideas. And as you're on Royal Road, like when you have something that's, you're 20,000, 30,000 words in, hit me up on Royal Road. Like just find Shadow Alley Press. You can just search it. My fictions are up there. Discount Dan. I run the Shadow Alley Press account. You can literally direct message me there and be like, hey, you want to check this out? Even if I'm not interested in publishing it, I'm almost always interested in doing shout outs. We have a ton of authors that are on Royal Road. So we're always happy to organize shout outs, especially for new authors. So it absolutely does not hurt to hit me up on Royal Road and say like, hey, it's especially mention that you saw this and be like, hey, I saw you talking about this thing, and I will 100% drop what I'm doing and go give your thing a look, and see where we go from there.
I mean, if that's not the definition of community, I don't know what is. That's huge. And again, going back to where you started, helping to support authors who are sort of approaching from that same direction as well. And of course, still putting out a ton of great work every single year. Thank you so much, James, for hopping on with me. And thanks for everyone who stayed till the end. Any final shout outs before I hit the stop record button?
No, just go check out all of our Shadow Alley authors. They're so good. There's so many amazing stories, and also like they're cool people that you'd want to have like a meal with. So go support good people making cool stuff in the world and approachable stories that are fun. So shadowalleypress.com, just go check them all out. They're so good.
Awesome. You heard it there. Shadowalleypress.com. Go. All right. Thank you all. I don't have an outro for these yet. Okay. Bye. Okay. Thank you all. Bye.